So, Larry, Trump wants Gaza to, wants the U.S. to go into Gaza and take care of the situation there.
He wants to depopulate.
Depopulate it. He's asking Egypt, he's asking Jordan to take in Gazans, neither of which want to. I'm not sure that bringing the U.S. into Gaza, at least if I was a U.S. military deployed to Gaza, I wouldn't feel too good about it as far as knowing that Iran is not happy with us. All their proxies are surrounding us.
I would have to say Trump thinks outside the box a lot.
He does.
And when I first heard about the Panama Canal, I said, what is he thinking? And the more I read about Panama, maybe he's got a point.
I agree. As Greenland as well.
Yeah. But Gaza, you're dealing with 1.8 billion, maybe 2 billion people on the earth that are Muslims.
So let's get into that. But first, I'm going to say welcome back to our listeners and welcome back to our Peace Through Straight podcast brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I'm your host, Joy Votrobek, and back with me is our senior analyst, Laurence Sanford. Thank you, Larry.
Nice to be here.
And we started off talking about Gaza and Trump's plans in Gaza there. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but Larry recently wrote a paper called Türkiye, New Ottoman Empire.
Yes.
And you can read Larry's article at our website, www.ascf.us. Please consider joining our newsletter. Stay up to date with the things we are doing here and consider donating to our organization. And Larry, the reason I brought up Gaza and Trump asking these other Arab nations to take in Gazans, what about Turkey?
Well, first of all, Turkey's not Arab.
No,
Turkey
but has he considered asking them to take in Gazans? They support Hamas, right? They've welcomed Hamas.
They support the Muslim Brotherhood.
Exactly.
That's one of the points I make, that Türkiye should be ejected from NATO, because it's an alliance with a common cause, and Türkiye, or in the old days known as Turkey, has different interests. They want to expand their influence through the Organization of Islamic Conference, OIC. In regards to Gaza, Turkey's involved in some of that because they support Hamas. And remember, years ago they had a flotilla that came down from Turkey, and the U.S. ship Liberty was fired upon by the Israelis, and that whole bloody mess there. But the flotilla of Turks came down, and there was bad blood involved. And now Erdogan, who's a new wannabe sultan or caliph of the Islamic community, is threatening, saying that Jerusalem should be Islamic, and we believe in that cause. And so that's what Hamas says. That's what Hezbollah says. So there's a lot of bad characters over there, and for U.S. troops to go into that mess, there's no winning. I mean, haven't we learned anything from Iraq and Afghanistan?
That's a concern to me.
It's a cultural thing, and until Islam reforms itself, it's a no-win situation.
I do understand where Trump's going with this, though, because otherwise, if things go back, I'm not going to say things are going back to normal with Gaza, but if the Gazan people, who, like you said, have been given all this propaganda against the Israelis, are we going to see another October 7th happen again?
They're saying that as soon as the truce, the ceasefire took place, they came up out of their holes in the ground and they say, we're ready for another October 7th. And I just don't.
So nothing changes, nothing changes.
You have to get rid of Hamas and the people within Gaza. The reason why people and leaders of Jordan don't want the Gazans in there, Hamas in there, is they had them in there. They had Palestinians refugees. They're a significant portion of the Jordanian population now. And at one time, they were causing all sorts of problems for the rulers of Jordan. And they ended up kicking Arafat out up to Lebanon, so that generated all problems in Lebanon. And the Egyptians don't want to have anything to do with the Hamas crew out of Gaza either, because they don't want to be destabilized, and the Saudis don't. So no one wants the Gaza. So
now, speaking of Egypt, though, the U.S. sends them millions and millions of dollars. Shouldn't we have some leverage there as far as, hey, you know what, Trump pulls his tariff thing with everybody else, can't we say, we're not going to be sending you all these millions of dollars if you don't come to some agreement taking in these Gazans, because we don't want another Israel-Gaza war
I think there's so many issues that Trump is working on. Egypt might be on the list, but I think it's not up there on the list to a Panama Canal or Greenland right now. But I'm sure this whole thing, and
I also heard him mention he wanted to send the Gazans to Indonesia,
yeah,
which they said no as well.
Yeah, and some inhabited, uninhabited. So how are they going to live there? He thinks outside the box. So I mean, his first term, the Abraham Accords. I mean, Israel signed some treaties with Arab countries. So who thought that company? And as you know, just because you're Muslim doesn't mean you're Arab. I mean,
exactly.
You got the Turks, you got the Indonesians, you got Pakistani. They're not Arab. So actually, as a percentage of the total Muslim world, Arabs are, even though it's the home of Islam, are not in the majority. The majority are probably Indonesian, over 200 million. So then you get the Pakistanis, they're 200 million. So the Arabs are a relatively small portion of the Islamic community worldwide. So. And
I know at the beginning of this whole war, the Israel-Gaza war, we asked this question: what's the end game? What's going to happen afterward? What do they do with these 2 million Gazans? How do they govern? How do they?
I didn't know then, and I still don't know.
It's still a mess.
It's still a mess, and you have to just not allow Hamas to resurrect its evil head. And one of the things that's happened since the beginning of the war is that Iran has lost its reach in Lebanon. It's lost its reach in Syria. And the support Hamas thought they're going to get from Hezbollah in Lebanon or from Syria isn't there anymore. So maybe they're able to crush the Hamas leadership even more. But the problem is the people. The people have been indoctrinated with hate. Yes. And the worst part is this indoctrination is through our money. The United Nations Relief Work Organization, the only relief organization in the world dedicated to the Palestinians, has allowed this hate-filled educational process to consist. So you talk to a typical Gazan youth or citizen, they hate Israel, they hate the West. Why we send any money? And the U.S. has been sending money, billions directly, and through the UN and through U.S. aid. I hope Trump cleans out that whole concept, and they're talking about that aid should be based on, is it good for the U.S.? And I would say aid to the Gazans and Hamas and the UN is a waste of money.
We've discussed this numerous times. And I'm sorry to digress from your Turkey paper, but I was kind of getting to a point of, at one point they were speaking of maybe Gaza could be ruled by several parties, a third party situation where maybe Israel is somewhat involved, but there would be other countries. Yeah. So do you think Turkey would be part of that?
I hope not.
Do they want anything to do with it?
I hope not. I'm sure they'd want to be, because they're stretching their limits. I mean, at one time the Ottoman Empire controlled out of Turkey from 1500s until the 1920s. Controlled the Middle East, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, and that included the Gaza Strip, which is just a small enclave, as you know, on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, surrounded by Egypt and Israel. And so, yeah, Turkey wants to get their hands in it because they're muddling around in Libya. They're supporting one of the factions in Libya. They're muddling around in the Sudan and Somalia and Syria. Certainly, they're big-time players in Syria, and they're attacking the Kurds. He wants to grow the Ottoman Empire, and Turkey is the leader in the OIC, which pretty much dominates the UN, because there's 57 member nations within the Organization of Islamic Conference, and they can control the voting blocks in the UN to some extent. So, yeah, Turkey would like to be there. I wouldn't want them there.
No.
But they're members of NATO. That's another issue.
Yes, so getting back to you mentioned that in the beginning, and getting back to that, while I know you were talking about they are really, Erdogan at least, has gone very autocratic, Muslim.
Islamic, yeah.
Islamic. And when it used to be a more social, secular country, just like Iran was at one point until you saw the Ayatollah come in.
Right.
So we don't want another Iran situation here.
No.
But on that point too, I would say, as far as reconsidering Turkey's membership in NATO, they bought Russia's S-400 missile defense
I know.
system, and they want our F-35. So that does not work well.
Doesn't work well with me.
No.
And I forgot to mention they're constantly threatening Greece, fellow NATO member, with islands. There's a bunch of islands off the coast of Turkey that are under Greek control. This is a throwback to World War I, where Turkey had to give up these islands to Greece. But you have to remember, after World War I, Turkey committed genocide. They refused to admit it, but they committed 1 million to 2 million Armenians to genocide death. They did the same. There's 1 million to 2 million, maybe more, Greeks that were killed and forced to leave Turkey and go back to Greece. And at one time, as you know, Turkey was part of the Byzantine Empire, which was Greek Orthodox. So when the Ottomans, which is a Turkic tribe out of Central Asia, so when you see Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, all the Stan countries are all basically Turkic tribal cultures from the middle of Asia.
And the Uyghurs, I believe, are Turkic also.
Yeah,
right?
that's
In
correct.
China, yes.
That's right. Matter of fact, China calls the province Xinjiang, but the Muslims call it East Turkestan. So, anyways, so Erdogan is trying to revitalize that whole caliph concept of the Muslim community and promoting Islam to dominate the world. So he's not a friend. But the Arabs don't like the Turks, and the Arabs don't like the Iranians, and the Iranians don't like anybody else either. It's just one constant.
As we talked about before, this clash of civilization seems to be happening constantly.
Oh, yeah. So the Islamic community hates the West, but within the Islamic community, the Sunnis hate the Shias, and the Shias hate the Alvis, and then you have the Sufis.
Turkey's right there in the middle of a very geopolitical situation because, and you talk here about begin closing the American bases in Turkey. Would we reconsider regional alternatives, maybe like Jordan or somewhere else?
I don't know if Jordan would be a good fit, but I think we should get our bases out of Turkey. Cyprus is mentioned, and there's another example of Ottoman Empire. Cyprus had at one time a relatively small portion of their population Turks from the old days of the empire, but it was primarily a Greek country. And again, there's no black and white, but there's more white than there is gray or black. Greeks were talking of having Cyprus go into the Greek, become a part of Greece. And the Turks at that time said, no, they sent the army in. So right now, Cyprus has 1/3 of the country, northern section, controlled by the Turkish army. And they've brought in the settlers, so now the population. And so there's that whole mess there, and then the Greek islands where Turkish military jets are constantly overflying and settling.
I can see your point about the bases, and it's been mentioned in the news as well in Turkey. But like I was saying, Turkey's a very geopolitical, strategic point.
Yes, it's a bridge.
So would it be a bad thing for us to remove those bases from a strategic point?
What do we use the bases for? At one time, they were against the Soviet Union. Are we going to go after the Soviet Union from Turkey?
No, but isn't it a good stance on the Middle East situation?
I can't answer that. I know we fly planes, right? But we have bases in the Arabian countries, the UAE and
Saudi.
Yeah, in Saudi Arabia.
So we would continue down that path. But I'm sure Israel is open, that we have a base in Israel. I think it's more of a marine base.
You know, we have over 100 bases overseas, Joy. If we cut back and affirm that, and we don't want American troops out there fighting in the sands of Arabia or sands of Turkey.
No.
And we have a small military presence right now in Syria, but it's basically a figurehead support for the Kurds. So that's something we could maybe make a base up in Kurdistan, but there's no country that recognizes Kurds. There's 30 or 40 million Kurds out there spread out over Turkey and Iraq and Syria and Iran. And none of those countries want to give up a piece of their pie for a separate Kurdistan. But if any country deserves to be formed, is the Kurds versus the Palestinians. Come on, the Palestinians are basically Arabs that moved in from Syria. I mean, they have no more right to that land than anybody.
Well, and the problem there, and where I was going in the beginning with Gaza and Trump's trying to clean out Gaza and move them on to other countries, is the problem is that the Palestinians do not want to recognize Israel at all as a state.
Right.
So there is no negotiating with a group that is unwilling to even want Israel there.
I know. Look at the atrocities that were committed October 7th. This whole hostage thing, that's an act, that's a criminal, it's against all standards of international behavior to take hostages, and they did it and got away with it.
And I understand that the war has caused thousands and thousands of deaths, and probably thousands of civilian deaths.
Yeah. Yeah. Israel didn't start it. Israel started only by existing.
By existing, right, and they don't want them to exist, so how can you negotiate with that?
Precisely.
But I digress again, so get back to Turkey here. They're just so all intertwined there, I think that, and then you bring up Syria, you bring up a good point, because Turkey has definitely made friends with HTS, the new leadership in Turkey, or in Syria.
Yes.
And that's a growing military relationship, it looks like.
Yeah, but Syria is not under the control of HTS completely now. You have the Kurds, you still have the Kurdish regions, you have some rebel groups within Syria, so it's not a done deal, but we'll see. Interestingly enough, the leader of HTS just said that Iran should stay the heck out and stop meddling in people's affairs, so that's
a plus.
That's a good plus.
So what do we think about Trump being in office and Turkey expanding?
Time will tell. I have no idea. I never would have thought he was going to suggest that Gaza be stripped of its population and be made into a Riviera of Middle East. And first of all, Riviera allows women in bikinis. I don't think that's going to happen in a Muslim land.
Well, we will see. Well, thank you, Larry, for your paper, and thank you for sharing a discussion with me today on this. And thank you to our listeners. Please join us on, subscribe, share, and comment on this YouTube and Rumble channel. Please let us know your thoughts on Gaza and on Turkey. And you can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Substack. Listen to our audio podcasts on your favorite Apple or Android phones. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Joy.
And thank you to our listeners. Join us again next time as we bring you the Peace Through Strength podcast.